On most of my trips to Walt Disney World, me and my family fly into Orlando International Airport. Then we take the Disney's Magical Express to the resort. But with the travel time between the airport and the property being 30 to 45 minutes depending on traffic, why isn't there a closer airport? Turns out, back in the day, there was an airport. It was even less than a mile from the Magic Kingdom. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of The History Of. My name is Tucker, but you can call me Epcat, and in today's episode we will be discussing Walt Disney World's STOLport. Before we begin, please be sure to subscribe, leave a comment on what you want to see next, and maybe even check out my new merchandise. Now grab a popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight.
Tomorrow, a project so vast, it has already been called a whole new Disney World.
In the October of 1966, 6 weeks before the death of Walt Disney, he announced his plans for Walt Disney World. This included a futuristic city of the future called Epcot. Among the many different plans that were made for the city, there was an airport of tomorrow located at the southern end of the property. It would be the way many guests would go in and out of the property by air. Of course, before Walt Disney could begin building Project X, he passed away. After the death of Walt, his older brother Roy took charge of the company. He decided to begin construction of Phase 1 of Walt Disney World, and this includes many of the things within the Magic Kingdom resort area today. The cast members began work and plans in detail were drawn up for the phase. One of the questions that had to be answered was, how does everyone get to Walt Disney World? Many of the airports that we know presently in Florida just didn't exist in the nature that they do today back in 1971. Orlando International Airport originally was an Air Force base and only had a small terminal for passengers. It was originally called McCoy. Fun fact, that's why the airport's IATA code is called MCO today. So of course, Disney had to come up with a better plan or instead fix their problem altogether. So on June 28, 1971, the Walt Disney Company announced they would be building an airport 1 mile from the Magic Kingdom called the STOLport. STOLports were a proof-of-concept airport in the 1970s that had a smaller runway than typical airfields. STOL stands for Short Takeoff Landing. The runway only allowed smaller airplanes to fly into the Lake Buena Vista STOLport. This proof-of-concept project followed in the footsteps of Walt's dream for Walt Disney World to be a showcase of emerging technologies, or in this case, STOLports. The Walt Disney World Airport can be split into 3 different phases. The first phase was a 2,000-foot runway for commercial planes to use only. The second was a terminal for passengers and a baggage collection off the planes. Later down the line, the third stage would call for another runway and parking spaces for private planes. Walt Disney World also decided to get an official airline, which was Eastern Airlines. This airline went out of business in the 1990s, but was one of the larger United States carriers at the time of the construction of the property. The only problem was that the runway was too small for their planes to land on. This is why they partnered with smaller airlines that could land at both the DWS STOLport, but also the larger airports that Eastern Airlines had flights at.
You can take your family to a place where dreams are born. Walt Disney World on Eastern, the airline with more flights from more cities to Walt Disney World than any other airline.
A dream is a wish your heart makes love.
There's only one official airline at Walt Disney World, and that's Eastern, the airline that's working harder for your dollar.
With the help of Eastern Airlines, Disney worked with other airlines to have non-stop connection flights from the major cities in Florida. On October 22, 1971, 21 days after the Magic Kingdom's opening, the STOLport opened for commercial use. The runway was constructed and a taxiway was built to get the planes off the runway. Interestingly enough, the runway was said to play the song If You Wish Upon a Star when you landed. Plans were to build the terminal, baggage collection system, and more parking for private planes later down the line. However, these plans, as you're soon to find out, would unfortunately never come to fruition. There are 2 airlines that flew out of Walt Disney World's STOLport. The 2 airlines to operate were Shawnee Airlines and Executive Airlines. Both would fly out of Walt Disney World in de Havilland DHC-6 Twin Otters. Shawnee Airlines was to operate 11 flights daily, and locations included Tampa, Daytona Beach, McCoy, and Fort Lauderdale. Executive Airlines was to start as a limited service through October 30th, expanding service throughout November. This is where the story begins to fall apart. On December 9, 1971, after 1 month of service to Walt Disney World, Executive Airlines eliminated their southern branch. This included flights to Walt Disney World. A few days later, the company filed for bankruptcy. This was due to the rise in tourism, since larger airlines like Delta and United began showing a larger presence in Florida. This began to hurt smaller airlines, and to fill the gap of the lost airline, Shawnee Airlines began to provide more service to new airports. However, this was also short-lived, and they began to struggle as well. Shawnee Airlines tried to keep the company running, however, the larger airlines in the area were the eventual downfall of their flights. After 1 year of service to Walt Disney World, Shawnee Airlines went out of business. The final scheduled flight out of Walt Disney World was on December 28, 1972. This all being said, what did happen to the runway? In short, it just sat there abandoned. After 1972, no authorized landings were made on it. There is a couple of stories of private planes landing on the runway. They were said to be towed off the property to a private airfield. Another fun fact, the Walt Disney Company landed Walt Disney's plane on the property in the 1990s. However, they did not land the aircraft on the runway. It instead landed on a portion of World Drive, where it was then moved to the backlot tour at Hollywood Studios. Today, that plane is left abandoned, though, due to the fact that the backlot tour has been destroyed for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. This all being said, 47 years later, the runway is still there to this day. It's used as a storage facility and cast member parking. So why was the STOL Port abandoned? An axe was thrown when the oil crisis began in 1973, but the final blow was made 9 years later. In 1982, the monorail was expanded with service to Epcot Center, and the line was built 1/10 of a mile from the STOL Port. That made it impossible to land without serious safety concerns, so that marked the end of the runway. To add to the reasons it will never open again, after 9/11, Walt Disney World received its own personal no-fly zone. This makes it impossible for any plane to go below 3,000 feet while on property. Plus, if you think about it, why would Disney want to reopen the runway? They have Disney's Magical Express from Orlando International, and the runway in Walt Disney World is only able to facilitate 4 planes at a time. The 4 planes wouldn't be big either. As for Eastern Airlines, they got rid of their sponsorship for flights and for their ride called If You Had Wings in Tomorrowland, which I will talk about in a future video. This wasn't the last time that Walt Disney World had an official airline, though.
Delta Airlines has been chosen the new official airline of Walt Disney World.
Anyway guys, hopefully you all enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to check out my website, leave a like if you're new, subscribe, hit the bell, check out our merch. And, you know, this is a new type of video on my channel, but I think it will be interesting to explore. Tell me what you think down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a magical day, everyone.